Which,
starting
by the way,
behave. So before lunch, we finished up 3.4, which deals with all the different agency relationships. Now we finally get to talk about something that we kind of made off limits earlier in the week. Does anybody remember what I told you earlier in the week? We weren't going to bring in because it polluted the conversation about agency and representation. Look, money, compensation.
money.
Absolutely.
Oh,
And
they can't talk.
oh, they can't talk. We better fix that. Sorry.
Well,
Um,
if you can't talk, then you better get to walking and turn your camera on too.
now you can talk. So when you look at 3.5, the conversation has switched now to compensation. Now we're not talking about representation so much as we are compensation. 3.5 is all about getting paid for our services,
Yes.
which is very different than the agency discussion. The agency discussion, who are we focused on all the time? Who was at the top of the pyramid and so important? We always look after their best interest. And
Client.
well, I'm sick of them. I'm sick of them. I don't want to talk about me.
Talk about me.
And that's what Unit 3.5 is about. Unit 3.5 is the selfish part of the class. Because in Unit 3.5, we're not focused on what is in the best interest of the client. We've assumed that we've already done that. As a fiduciary broker, we've already looked out for the best interest of the client. What we want to look out for now is making sure we get paid for the services we have rendered in the transaction. Did everybody kind of see where I'm going with the mindset for this section?
Yes.
Okay.
This
And
ain't no hobby.
the agency contracts that we use to be hired, which promise that we will look out for the best interest of the clients, also have a whole other section that we have not focused on yet that deals with our compensation. And here's the thing you need to understand about compensation in our business. The agency contracts we sign that promise us compensation don't just need to promise the amount of the compensation, but they also need to promise under what circumstances it is owed. How many of you feel like if you have a contract for a job, that the job description is part of what should be in the contract? Not just the pay itself, but what you have to do to earn that pay. Is that important in any kind of a job contract?
Yes.
Yeah, like that ain't in my job description.
That's exactly right. This is largely like a job description for the office from the client. And so it's going to outline the situation under which the office has earned their compensation and how much compensation they've earned. Now, we do bring back into some terminology from the agency relationships because it's important here with the money as well. That word exclusive. Now, remember, we always owe our clients in a fiduciary situation, we always owe them our best. We have to look out for the client's best interest at all times in a fiduciary relationship. But clients don't have to look out for our best interest. It's not their job to look out for our best interest. If we really want to look out for the best interest of the office, the brokerage, or even ourselves personally, what type of agency agreement should we hope that our client will sign?
Exclusive.
Exclusive one. What makes the exclusive agency agreement, whether it's an exclusive listing agreement or whether it's an exclusive buyer agency agreement, what makes that better from the perspective of the office? What makes that a better agreement?
They promise to work with
One firm.
They've promised, they being the client, has promised that they will only work with that one office, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that one office, if they have exclusivity with that client, has the right to say, you know what, I really don't care where you go and what you do. You better take me with you because you agreed that you would do that. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
I mean, because think of it this way. If we have an exclusive buyer agency agreement, I've heard people in this business get frustrated at some of the silliest things. They'll say, I can't believe my client. Would you believe this weekend they went to that new construction neighborhood and they went under contract to buy a house and I wasn't even there. They didn't even tell me. I can't even believe the nerve of those people. And I'll ask them a question. I'll say, do you have a buyer agency agreement with them? And they'll say, well, yeah. And I'll say,
Why are you mad?
does it have the word exclusive at the top of it? Well, yeah. Then why are you mad? Because here's the thing. They chose to go without you. That doesn't mean they escape having to do what?
Pay you.
Having to pay you. As my grandfather would say, that's an asphalt situation. Their ass and their fault. They should have taken you because they were paying for you whether you went or not. That's the whole beauty of that exclusive agreement. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so exclusivity is a big deal. Now, we're going to focus on exclusive listing agreements first, or just listing agreements in general. What party is hiring us to represent them if we sign a listing agreement?
Seller.
The seller.
Seller, right? The seller. If Seth, to your question, not yet. We're waiting to hear back from you.
All right, thank you.
So when you look at listing agreements, that is an agreement between an office, which remember could be a firm or a sole proprietorship, but an office and a seller. The seller is hiring the office to represent their best interest in the transaction. Keep in mind, we call these contracts for a reason. One of the first things you need to learn about the idea of a contract. Contracts are not made to be broken, folks. Contracts are meant to be binding. Contracts are meant to hold you in place. If this is a contract, is the seller allowed to just fire the listing firm and walk away at any time they want to once this has been agreed to?
No.
No. Is the listing firm able to just walk away and go, you know what, I hate working for you anytime they want to?
No.
No. If they want to get out of this thing, there's a way out. But what is that way out? Don't forget there's a way out of this thing. What is the way out?
Complete sale.
They can complete the thing. They can do the job. That's one way. What's another way if they just both sick of each other?
Mutual agreement.
You can have a mutual agreement to terminate this agreement. But mutual means how many have to agree? Both. It means the office has to agree. And FYI, who do you think is going to make that determination for the office? Do you think the individual licensees in the office are going to have the ability to make that determination that the office is going to let this person out? Be something that the broker in charge would be responsible for doing on behalf of the office. So the broker in charge would have to say, yes, you know what, we're willing to release you. But also the seller would have to say, well, I'm willing to release you.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a mutual agreement to terminate. So you can't just really fire someone in these relationships. Now, the most common example of a listing agreement, and we're going to talk about the different types here in just a minute, but the most common one by far is something called an exclusive right to sell listing agreement. Well, we know a lot of these words already. Listing agreement just means who's hiring our services.
Seller.
Seller.
Seller, right? And so there's another word here that we should be familiar with. They are hiring us how?
Exclusive.
Right? So they want to be in an exclusive relationship with our office. Now, I only gave you one paragraph here because I just wanted to show you like the introduction to the thing. This particular listing agreement is 11 pages long. So these are very detailed agreements about the responsibilities of the seller, the responsibilities of the listing firm. But if you notice here, and the reason I showed you this paragraph, because it's going to hopefully start to ram this idea home. It says this exclusive right to sell listing agreement is entered into between the seller. So let's say Sam, the seller, is hiring us here. As the seller of the property described below, and blank as the listing firm. So if Seth was taking this listing, would his name be on this line?
No.
No, it would be what?
The firm. Travis.
It would be Trav Talks LLC, right?
Follow the chain of command.
Because to
Or-
get to Seth, you have to hire the entire group that he works with. You got to go all the way to the top of the food chain for Seth. There is nothing higher on Seth's sort of food chain than Trav Talks LLC.
Right. And this is not important, but I was going to say follow the pyramid scheme.
Yeah,
I mean, it's what it is.
it's very true.
Not really.
Very true. I mean, for all intents and purposes. Now, one of the most common misconceptions about agency agreements is, what is the job? What have we been hired to do? And one of the most common answers you'll get with when you ask people, well, what's the job with a listing agreement? People will say, sell the house, sell the house. I can't sell somebody else's house, folks. It's not mine. Who's going to ultimately sell the house? Who's going to sign the paperwork? Who's going to agree to the price?
Seller.
The seller is. So get that out of your mind right now. Listing firms are not hired to sell the house.
And
now,
technically,
Stephanie said to market the home. Here's the thing though, Stephanie. Marketing the home's not really what the listing firm's hired to do either. That's part of the job. But if the whole job was marketing the home, wouldn't we be owed money whether we found a buyer or not?
yes.
So be specific. What do you think the seller is willing to pay us for? What service specifically?
Find a buyer.
Find a buyer. Here's the best way.
Closes.
Here's the best way you can think of compensation in our business. What we are really always paid is a finder's fee. People pay us to find them what they don't already have. What is it that sellers don't already have?
A buyer.
A buyer.
They don't have a buyer for the property, correct?
Correct.
They're not willing to pay us for our representation. That's just something that comes along as part of the deal. They're not willing to pay us for our advice. That's just something that comes along as part of the deal. They're willing to pay us for finding them the perfect buyer. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Okay? Buyer's agency agreements. Buyers don't pay us for our advice. They don't pay us for our representation. They don't pay us for our loyalty or our confidentiality. What is it that buyers need us to find for them? What is it that the buyer doesn't have?
House.
The perfect property that they can purchase, correct?
Yes.
And so we're almost always being hired to go find something. So when you start to think about it in that way, it becomes much easier to understand when we have actually earned our keep. When should we say to our client, okay, you owe me my money? Now, this is where you're going to have to disconnect yourself from how we know it happens in the real world. In the real world, when generally would a listing firm expect to get paid?
When you close.
When you close. Here's the problem with that, though. That's not when the listing firm is actually owed their money. In this class, we're not focused on when you're going to get the money. We're focused on when you're owed the money, when the money is owed. And we're owed the money as a listing firm long before we ever get to the closing table. As a matter of fact, we're owed the money as a listing firm even if we never get to the closing table. Because what is it that we were hired to find?
Find a buyer.
A buyer. Something they don't have.
We were hired to
Otherwise, they
find
wouldn't.
what they didn't have. The perfect
Otherwise, they wouldn't hire
buyer.
us.
The perfect buyer. Let me ask y'all a question. Hypothetically, is it possible that I find them the perfect buyer and they still refuse to accept that buyer?
Yes.
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 Yes. Hypothetically, is it possible for me to look at that seller and say, that's fine. It's your property. You don't have to sell it.
Only you can sell it.
Only you can sell it. I can't sell it for you. But you are going to run me my dollars.
Because I did find what you asked me to.
Because I found exactly what you told me to go out and find for you. Is that hypothetically possible, folks?
Yes.
Yes.
If we bring them the perfect buyer on a silver platter and they just refuse to eat, they still have to pay for the meal. Because they ordered it. They asked for it. And that's where we get to the phrase ready, willing, and able buyer. Most listing agreements refer to our compensation, and this is just for listing agreements, not buyer agency agreements. We're going to talk about those separately. But most listing agreements refer to our compensation by saying the job of the listing firm is to produce a buyer who is ready, willing, and able to purchase the property at the terms the seller has asked for. Let me ask y'all a question. Did the list price just become important? I'm going to repeat that phrase, that sentence to you again. The job of the list firm is to produce a buyer that is ready, willing, and able to purchase the property at the terms that the seller has laid out. Did the list price just become important?
Yes.
Very.
Yes, because now I have a target to hit. Do I not, as a listing firm?
Yes.
If they tell me they want $500,000 for the property, I need to bring them a buyer who is ready to pay what? $500,000. A buyer that is willing to pay what?
$500,000.
How do you think I would prove? If I was trying to prove, I brought you a buyer that's ready and willing to pay $500,000. How would I prove that?
With offer.
The offer?
Oh, an offer. So you mean even if the seller doesn't accept that offer, just me bringing the offer is proof that I found a buyer who's ready to pay $500,000 and willing to pay $500,000. What do y'all think?
I know.
We're not quite there yet, though. What one additional thing do I have to prove about that buyer if I'm going to say, hey, I want my money?
They're able.
They're able to pay $500,000. How many of you have now just started to realize why in our business it is very common to ask for a what when an offer comes in?
Brady's all over it.
A pre-qualification. Because we might at some point need to say to the seller, no, homie, we produced you a ready, willing, and most importantly,
And
what?
Able.
Able buyer to pay you what you said you wanted.
Absolutely.
And you're more than free to change your mind, but you're going to pay us.
This is why the buyer's ability to make an offer and qualify for it is a material fact. Just tying it back together.
Absolutely. Love that. I love that tie back. You know, remember how we talked about it's a material fact if it impacts our client's ability to close the transaction? Well, This is one of the reasons. We have to know that people are able to move forward
buy the property
with that purchase. So what are ways I could prove a buyer's able? Obviously, a pre-qualification letter. What else?
Bank statements.
A bank statement if they're going to pay cash. Right? That shows that they're able. Right? So the offer shows that they're ready and willing. The funds shows that they're able. Now, I want you to be careful here. Don't let them use buzzwords and phrases to kill you. If they say, Seth produces a buyer who offers $5,000 less than the list price, but is otherwise ready, willing, and able to complete the transaction. Is that a ready, willing, and able buyer, folks?
No, it's not.
No.
No, that's a big fat no. Because they offered what?
Less in the terms.
Less than what the seller wanted. So here's the thing. If you're going to make a claim to a seller that they owe you money based on producing a ready, willing, and able buyer, that means no strings attached. The buyer has to be ready to pay how much?
$500,000.
$500,000.
Full price, whatever that is. Right? They have to be willing to pay what?
Full price, $500,000.
Full price, whatever that is. And they have to be able to pay what?
Full price.
Full price, whatever that is, with no strings attached. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
that's when we've actually completed the goal of producing a ready, willing, and able buyer. Now, I will tell you, thankfully for us, and we're going to take a look at this in just a second, that's not the only time we've earned our money. There are other conditions under which we've earned our money as well. But this is one of them under which we could say we've done our job. Here's why it's important to talk about this one. Do you think on the test they may hit you with a situation where Quanda is our seller, she signed a listing agreement, $500,000, we bring her an offer of $505 from a buyer who's pre-qualified, they've offered $5,000 more than the list price, and Quanda decides she's not going to accept the offer? Well, first of all, does she have the freedom to not accept the offer as a seller?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. But does she still owe a commission, even though we're not going to get to closing?
Yes.
Yes, because the firm has done its job. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Now, that's not going to be the only way we can earn our compensation. As a matter of fact, most of the time, that's not the way we're going to earn our compensation. Most of the time, we earn it through other paths, like, for example, closing. What do you think is going to be the second way they say we can earn our commission? If the thing actually what? Closes. Because here's the thing. Could it close to a buyer that is not considered ready, willing, and able?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, don't sellers sometimes take less than full price?
Yes.
So if you bring them an offer of less than full price, you have not produced a ready, willing, and able buyer. Does that make sense for everybody? But if they accept the offer anyway and they close, guess what the listing agreement's most likely going to say about that situation?
That's covered.
That's covered. You're going to pay us for that as well. How about, let me give you this one. How about if the sellers won't let you do your job? How about if they won't let you show the property? Every time you get ready to show it, they got a birthday party, their kids are visiting, they don't feel good today. It just ain't a good time. You've tried to do 10 showings and you can't ever get anybody in there to look at the property because the seller's always got problems. Do you think the listing agreement might say something about that?
Yes.
Yes, it should.
If it should, and it does in most cases, it's going to say if you interfere with our ability to do our job, you're going to have to do what? You're going to have to pay us. So ready, willing, and able buyers are not the only path to compensation, but they're one of the important paths, and that will be tested.
Right. Get your mindset too in the right spot. Because a lot of times we talk about between buyer and seller in this class. Remember, we are now being selfish. We are saying, this is between me and you, Mr. Customer or Mrs. Customer, whether you're the seller or the buyer. So now, what are our responsibilities? If you don't fulfill your responsibility, what do you owe me? Vice versa.
And as soon as they sign this agreement, they're not Mr. and Mrs. Customer, they're Mr. and Mrs. what? Client, right? With all the responsibilities that go there. Now, some rules about agency agreements in North Carolina. And this first one will certainly be tested. Agency agreements in North Carolina must have an expiration date. Now, in the grand tradition of the Real Estate Commission not telling you how to do your job, do you think they're going to tell you, it cannot be longer than 6 months, or it has to be at least 90 days, or you should do it for 30 days? Does the Real Estate Commission ever going to give you a time period? No. They just simply say it has to have some expiration date. It cannot be open-ended. You can't have a listing agreement that's in place until the house sells. That's not going to work. It needs a date. Even if that date is 99 years from now, that's fine. It's just got to have a date on it. Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the second one here, the state of North Carolina, and this is not true of all states. I find this very interesting. It's not true of all states. There are federal laws in place that prevent discrimination. Not all states, though, say that our agency agreements have to make it clear that we will not discriminate for our clients. Remember how I said we obey our clients? Unless they ask us to do what?
Or to break the law.
Unless they ask us to break the law. So this is one of the things that the Real Estate Commission says we must put in our agency agreement. One set of laws we're not going to break on your behalf are discrimination laws. We don't care if you don't want a buyer of a certain religious belief. We don't care if you want a buyer of a certain ethnicity. We don't care if you like families that have children or if you don't like families that have children. We're not going to follow your commands that have to do with those things because those things are prohibited by law. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so we have to, here's the thing, and this is why it's important that this is here. I'm gonna harp on this for just a second. You're about to learn something that I bet you didn't know. Raise your hand real quick if you knew that sellers are and buyers are not bound by the fair housing laws in this country.
Oh, raised virtual hand, virtual hand.
Sellers and buyers can do whatever the hell they want to do.
It sure can.
Can a seller refuse to sell a house to someone because they don't like the fact that that person's Jewish?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and can tell them right to their face that they're not going to sell it to them. There are no laws that actually prevent discrimination by sellers and buyers. How many of you I didn't know that, right? How many of you, be honest, you didn't know that? But those laws do impact us. So we're telling these people that are about to hire us, if you're that gross person that wants to be discriminatory, don't do what?
Don't
Don't hire us.
Hire me. Because the minute you hire me, you lose the right to that discrimination because I'm not going to participate in it on your behalf. The Real Estate Commission makes us put that in the list. How many of y'all think that's actually a good thing that the Real Estate Commission makes us put it front and center that we are not going to discriminate for your disgusting ass. We're not going to do it.
Definitely.
I mean, it is North Carolina.
Right? And so I think it's good that we put this out there. Janet, you had your hand up. You've been patient. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. With the putting her hand up, I wasn't sure if you know.
Yeah, you're good.
For the question. For two questions, one just came up. But if you can be discriminatory to the face if you're own it yourself. I thought you couldn't. You don't like put that market that, or is that something different?
We're going to talk about the slight restrictions on. There's a difference between discriminating and advertising that you're discriminating. But for right now, we just want to make it clear that sellers can discriminate. Period.
Yeah,
Buyers
okay.
can discriminate.
And
But
my first question. Oh, sorry.
Go for it.
Keep going. Oh, my first question was, I feel like it's tripped me up on the test before. You know how there has to be a date, an expiration date.
Yep.
Sometimes, so I guess open-ended would be considered when they say, 6 months from the original date. It's not.
That's open-ended. That's not a.
Even though that's a date.
That's not a date. A date is July 18th, 2023. Okay. That's a date.
So no matter what date, any of those open-ended.
It has to be an exact point on a calendar. That's exactly right.
Okay, cool.
You can't, that's a great question. You can't put 30 days past the highest offer. That's not an expiration date. A date is a date.
Yep.
Okay.
Specify.
All right. So now the last thing that the Real Estate Commission says must be on all of our agency agreements. Remember, somebody has to sign this agreement on behalf of the office. We know that the client's going to sign binding themselves, but isn't the office promising something in this agreement as well?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes.
And somebody has to sign this agreement on behalf of the office. Do you think we're going to make the BIC have to go and sign all these agreements, or are we going to give the individual brokers the right to sign these agreements on behalf of the office? What do you think?
The
Individual,
brokers.
The individual brokers. But since we give them that right, we make them put their name and their license number on it. So that way in the future, if there's ever any question about which one okay, we see we're hiring Trav Talks LLC, but who actually put this in front of the seller?
Right.
Right.
We can see
And-
which one did it.
What kind of agency would that be?
Well, that's a great question. Since Seth has the power to sign that listing agreement and bind our firm, does he have agency for the firm? What do y'all think?
Agency
General.
power levels?
And what power level does he have? Does he have special agency, general agency, or universal agency?
General.
General.
He has general agency for the firm.
I don't think that's a huge detail. I just
And you
Like
know
chicken shot
that
of things.
because he's doing what on behalf of the firm at that point in time?
taking an action.
Doing something on behalf of the firm, right? Now, that client may be giving the firm special agency, but for Seth to sign, he needs general agency for the firm because he's actually representing the firm by signing that, is he not?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. See, agencies all around us all the
Oh
time.
God, it is.
All the time. So those are some basic rules about agency agreements. Now, this is another excerpt of a page from the most common listing agreement used in North Carolina. And this comes from page 2 of that. You see page 2 of the 10-page agreement. Why do you think this page is so important to us? Look at the things it covers. Remember how important we said a target was in this thing, in the listing agreement?
Mhm.
Well, now does the list price take on a whole new relevance all of a sudden? Not only is that the number you're going to put out there as far as marketing, but doesn't that give you the target to hit for claiming you presented them with a what kind of buyer?
Ready, willing,
Ready,
and able.
willing, and able.
A ready, willing, and able buyer. So if they say, okay, we want to list this property for $450,000, don't we now have a target?
Yes.
Here's how you know that. Look at this paragraph right here. It says, if a ready, willing, and able buyer is procured means found. Procured is a fancy way of saying found. So if a ready, willing, and able buyer is found by the firm, a cooperating real estate firm, so if we do a cooperative transaction, that applies to the seller or anyone else during the term of this agreement at the price and on the terms set forth herein, then we're owed a commission. But only if we present them with what number?
450,000.
$450,000. Oh, unless you read a little bit more detailed. I'm going to highlight something for you here. And then I want you to tell me if we got them.
So it says we're at any price acceptable.
Mhm.
Wait.
Do we got them?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
If we bring them an offer of $425, we have not produced a ready, willing, and able buyer, have we?
No.
No. But it says if they accept that lower offer, they still what?
They
Still
still,
Still us.
They still owe us.
We've done our job.
You changed it. You accepted it. You didn't have to accept it. That was on you. When you accepted it, you agreed that you would do what was our compensation?
pay.
Pay it.
You would pay us. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
So this agreement is setting up the circumstances under which we're going to be owed compensation. And let me tell you why that's important. Because right here is going to be the total amount of that compensation. And I'm just throwing a number in there. I put 7%. Could it be 6% or 5% or 2% or 18%? Could it be any number that the client and the office have negotiated?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Right? Remember, this is going to be a negotiation between you're being hired by them. Isn't being hired part of that? The conversation always going to be how much you going to pay me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? And so that's a negotiation that takes place between the office and the client. So let's say they've agreed that they're going to compensate our office with 7% of the sales price of the property. Could we do it as a flat fee? Notice it says percent of the gross sales price of the property or blank. Could we just charge them a flat $10,000? Is that allowable?
Yes.
Yeah. Could we charge them a John Deere lawnmower and a trip to the Caribbean?
Yes.
That's what we wanted to do. I mean, it's all negotiable here. There are no wrong or right answers here. It's whatever we want to agree for as far as compensation. I'll tell you the truth, folks. How many of you are thinking about going into commercial real estate?
I am.
Right? Here's what you'll sometimes see in commercial real estate. Oh, sorry. Let me back up.
Ten percent of ownership of the properties.
Could we negotiate even that our compensation is going to be some share of ownership of another piece of property rather than being paid in cash? Could we negotiate that this seller is going to give us a percentage of ownership of some other property they have?
Yeah.
Yeah, negotiate.
And that happens all the time in commercial real estate, folks. If you've got a seller that owns 10 shopping centers and they don't want to pay you right now, you might negotiate with them to get some ownership of another shopping center that they own, which means when they collect rent, are you owed some of that rent?
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. When they get ready to sell that shopping center, are you owed some of that money?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, because you are a what of that property?
10% owner.
You're a 10% owner. So here's what I want. Now, that's not common in residential real estate, but what I want to stress to you is listing agreements could apply to any type of property, and anything goes here for compensation. Whatever we want to negotiate between the client and the firm is entirely acceptable. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. Now, it's obviously much more common for this simply to be some kind of a percentage of sales price. So we just put 6% in there. There's your compensation. That would be the most common. Now, we've talked about the different types of agreements that offices might have. We've talked about something called an open agreement. What did we say? What did we say about an open agreement? Let's get down to it. What did we say about an open agreement?
It's like
There's
you're
no
not
commitment.
exclusive. You have multiple.
You don't want it.
In this house, there's some whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. There's some
Very
whores in
open.
this house.
There's a lot of certified freaks going on in open agreements, because if a seller signs an open listing agreement, they are promising this listing firm, we'll pay you if you bring us a buyer. We'll pay you a finder's fee if you bring us a ready, willing, and able buyer, right?
Right.
But they're not promising that they won't also hire what?
Other agent.
Another firm.
Another firm.
Another broker.
So could a seller who hires an open listing agreement hire 10 different firms and say, I'm only going to pay the one that shows up with a buyer?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Absolutely. But then we talked about exclusive agreements. Notice there are how many exclusive agreements here?
There are two.
Two.
There are two of
Good job.
them. So you can't just pay attention to the word exclusive, because there's two types of exclusive agreements. Now,
You think they'll try to trick them on the test with that?
I know they will. I know
Pay
they will.
attention.
And so what I do with this is to kind of take it away from real estate for a second and give you a different analogy, a different way to think about this. Really, a listing agreement, an agency agreement, is just an employment contract. Hopefully we're all good on that point now, right? It's just an employment contract. That's all this is. At the end of the day, that's either going to be an open employment contract or it's going to be an exclusive employment contract. So let's take it away from real estate for a second, and let's say we're hiring a landscaping company. Because we could have open agreements with a landscaping company, and we could have exclusive agreements with a landscaping company. Look at the first one here. And here's what you need to understand. The thing that we're hiring these offices to do, the thing that we're hiring this landscaper to do, is the same in every situation. What's changing is the promises that the client is making and the circumstances under which the client will pay the landscaping company.
Right.
So look at
And this is going to come full circle in a second. Just
It will. Trust me. We're going to bring it back to real estate in just a second. So look at the first one. It says John convinces a homeowner to sign a contract with A1 Landscaping, which he owns. So John owns A1 Landscaping. And he convinces a homeowner to sign a contract with A1 Landscaping that promises payment of $100 to A1 when A1 mows the grass. That sounds pretty straightforward, correct?
Mm-hmm.
We'll pay you $100 when you cut our grass. The homeowner does not promise to only work with A1, but will have the freedom to find other landscapers if they want. Right away, what do we know about this agreement, folks?
Not exclusive.
Not open.
It's not exclusive, so it's going to be
good
what?
job.
Open.
Open.
This is going to be an example of an open agreement.
Mhm.
It says if another landscaping company mows the grass, A1 will not get paid because their agreement only specified they would get paid if they what?
More the
Do
grass.
the work.
They mowed the grass. If the homeowner gets tired of waiting and goes out and mows the grass themselves or gets somebody else to cut it, A1 is SOL, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Hopefully you all know what SOL means.
Yeah.
I don't. Sugar of love? No.
Something like that. Don't ask my mom. Don't
Somebody
ask my
said
mom.
I don't.
You know, my
So
mom would-
innocently.
My mom would probably tell you like sold out line or something like that. It means shit out of luck. Okay, you know they would not get paid.
Oh, now I got a message on my coworkers back.
Exactly. It means it would not get paid. Look at number 2. Same circumstance but different agreement. It says John convinces a homeowner to sign a contract with A1 that promises payment of $100 to A1. So far, same thing, correct?
Mm-hmm.
When the grass is mowed by any professional landscaping company. In other words, it doesn't matter what landscaper actually cuts the grass. The only one the homeowner is going to deal with and compensate is what company?
A1.
A1.
A1. Folks, does that sound like an open agreement to you, or does that sound pretty dang exclusive?
Exclusive.
That sounds exclusive to me. That's an exclusive agreement. Here's what it says about that. It says this gives A1 the flexibility to either mow the grass themselves or subcontract the work out. Could A1 go find another landscaper to cut the grass?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, but who would the owner of the land still be on the hook to compensate?
A1.
A1. This is called subcontracting, right?
Oh.
And so no matter who cuts the grass here, the compensation always goes from homeowner to what?
Contractor.
Contract.
A1.
To the contractor.
Contractor, though.
Or the agent.
Which one?
Which one?
A1.
A1
Oh.
and A1 only. And that's what makes this an exclusive agreement. Does the homeowner have the freedom to go out and hire Blue Sky Landscaping to cut the grass?
Yes.
Oh.
No, they don't.
And
No,
number
they
2?
do not. They do not.
You can hire anyone.
The homeowner has promised they will only hire who?
A1.
A1. That's what makes this an exclusive agreement. It says the homeowner promises only to work directly with and compensate A1 even if another company actually mows the grass. If another company mows the grass, why would that other company be out there? If the homeowner can't hire them, who could?
A1.
A1.
A1. A1. Folks, we do this all the time in the real estate business. How many of you have ever heard of the MLS?
Yes.
The multiple listing service.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Guess what one of the main reasons we put things in the MLS is as real estate brokers?
The subcontract.
How much you're going to get paid?
So other real estate brokers will see our listings. Do we do that just to rub their nose in it? Or do we do that to say, hey, help us out here, help us find a buyer, and we'll give you some of the money that they're paying us? What do y'all think?
Yes.
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 Aren't we really subcontracting out the work when we do that?
Yes.
Right? And we can do that because the seller signed what kind of an agreement with us?
Exclusive.
Exclusive.
Agreement. So I don't have to be all protective anymore. I don't have to worry if somebody from HPW Strickland Road comes and sells one of my listings if I have what kind of an agreement?
Exclusive.
An exclusive agreement. Because the only way HPW Strickland Road is going to get paid is if I pay them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm still going to get paid by that seller. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
But now I want you to look at the last thing here. It says, if, however, the owner gets tired of waiting and has to mow it themselves, A1 will not get paid. That sounds pretty fair, does it not?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody agree with me on that?
Yeah, sounds
Yes.
Okay. This is going to be called the exclusive agency version. You won't really know the difference until you see it. And hopefully you're going to see it very quickly coming up here between the exclusive agency and the exclusive right to sell. It says John convinces a homeowner to sign a contract with A1 that promises payment of $100 to A1 when the grass is mowed, no matter who mows it. If A1 mows the grass, they get $100. If another company mows the grass, A1 gets $100. So in other words, the owner has promised to only work with what company?
A1.
One. So is it fair to say this is also an exclusive agreement?
Yes.
Look at the end of this one, though. If the owner gets tired of waiting and mows it themselves, A1 still gets paid $100. Even if the person goes out and cuts their own grass, they have promised to compensate this landscaping company with $100.
Yes.
How many of you feel like John must be a hell of a salesperson to get somebody to agree to this kind of contract?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, don't that sound pretty good? We're going to pay you when the grass get cut. If you cut it, we'll pay you. If you get somebody else to cut it, we'll pay you. Hell, if I get a wild hair and I go out and cut it myself, I'm still going to pay you just for the hell of it.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that the greatest contract you can ever imagine having?
100%.
Folks, this is called the exclusive right to sell.
Sell.
Now, let's look at all of them again and compare them. If you had to guess, just based on that description that we just talked about, which one of these do you think is not common at all? Which one do you think firms are going to run from?
Open.
Open listing.
Open. Good job.
Can we all agree that firms are not going to want to do open listings?
No.
Right?
Right. And I just want to say that's really good for you guys to pick that up because he asked from the firm's perspective. If you can put that into perspective, you're getting it.
Yeah.
So good job.
Now, based on the other two, we obviously can. Which one would be better for the firm, but of the other two?
Exclusive right to
Three.
Exclusive right to sell.
Mm-hmm.
But which one do you think is the most popular? Which one is used the most often? Which one do you think most sellers agree to when they list their property for sale?
Exclusive agency.
Agency listing.
Exclusive agency.
Well,
I'm going to back
I
up
would
a few
say
slides.
exclusive right
Number 3.
to sell agency.
What? That's crazy.
Two.
I said when I put this snippet up here, this is by far the most commonly
Most common.
used one in North Carolina.
Exclusive right to sell.
Folks,
Oh.
can we sell something to them if we're getting them to agree to an exclusive right to sell listing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, because here's what we're saying in an exclusive right to sell listing. If my office finds you a buyer, you're going to do what?
Pay me.
Pay me.
You're going to pay me.
Pay me.
If another office finds you a buyer, you're going to do what?
Pay me.
You're going to pay me. If you find the buyer yourself,
You pay me.
you're going to do what?
Pay me.
Hey.
You're going to pay me. Now, here's a question, and I'm going to give you the most honest answer I can possibly give you, and probably a more honest answer than you'll ever get about this. I've had people say, is this in the best interest of the client? And here's my honest answer. Absolutely not. There is no way you can argue that the exclusive right to sell listing is in the best interest of the client. It's in the best interest of who?
The firm.
The firm.
The office.
The office.
The office.
Folks, you want to hear the evil truth?
We're still going with 3.
Well, but here's the thing. We would never do things that are not in the best interest of our client, correct?
Right. Correct.
But they're not our client yet. They're still our customer.
Jessica, I could kiss you. They're not my client yet.
Go off, Jessica.
I know, right?
Hey, girl.
They're not my client yet. They ain't my client until they do what with this agreement?
Until they
Sign
sign
it.
They sign it. They are not
And the
my
minute
client
they
until they
do,
sign it. Now, the minute
That's when you go, you made the biggest mistake of your life.
exactly, the minute they do, if they say to me, now should I have signed out? I'd be like, mm-mm. Too
No.
late now though. Too late now though. Am I obligated to give them advice about what's in their best interest before they sign this thing?
No.
No. It's the one time in this business you get to be selfish.
But if you, again, this is a contract between a office and a customer, potential client.
Yeah.
So it's a negotiation. Firms don't have to offer all three of these.
I love how you just said that, Seth. Here's the truth.
No, I'm just kidding.
Here's the truth. People say to me all the time, why do people agree to the exclusive right to sell listing? Let me ask y'all a question.
They don't know about
How
that.
many of you knew there was more than one type before today?
No.
Nobody, I didn't know.
And how many of you are now going to be sworn to secrecy when you talk to members of the public for the rest of your life?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Because when you present listing agreements to them, are you obligated to present all the different types of listing agreements, or can you just offer them the one listing agreement that your office is willing to agree to?
It's your
Yes.
menu.
Right. Right.
The one
Travis,
that agrees to.
I want to harp on what you said about your office agrees to or practices. Remember, we were saying some offices will practice dual agency, some won't. Some offices, aka the big, will need to make a decision on which listing agreements they're going to also offer. So if, for instance, there's a broker at an office and they don't want to practice an open listing agreement, but their firm or office does allow that,
Right.
then they have to offer it.
They have to present it, right? That's exactly right. But if your office only offers one, like for example, Trav Talks LLC, we will only represent clients. If somebody wants an open listing or somebody wants an exclusive agency listing, bye.
Right.
I mean,
Honestly, it might be more on the commercial side, but I don't know when I have ever seen an open listing agreement.
well, I mean, true. I mean, but I'll be honest with you. If somebody said to me, "Oh, we want to hire you, but we would only do an open listing,"
Hit the road, Jack. Don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. Hit the road.
because we ain't doing one.
It's my grandpa's name.
Because here's the thing. What are you inviting your client, to be able to do if you sign and agree to an open listing?
Work with
Don't
others.
cheat on me.
Cheat.
Right.
You're saying you can cheat on me. Imagine pulling up in front of your new listing and seeing this out front. Look at that picture. Imagine pulling up in front of your new listing and seeing 15 signs out there because you agreed to an open listing. Could you see this if you had agreed to an open listing?
Yep.
You would.
Absolutely. And the seller's only going to pay how many of those offices?
One.
The one that
Fun.
produced
The one who shows up with the buyer.
And that's if they don't find the buyer themselves, the seller.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the ones who don't find the buyer, they're going to get nothing. They're going to get nothing. So this is very uncommon. Very uncommon. Very few firms, very few offices will agree to do something like this. And I think you can probably see why.
And just how Zeta said, she thinks whoever said it's your menu is a great comparison.
That's exactly
'Cause
right.
The companies, the firms, the offices are the restaurant.
Now,
And the
I will
bank
take
makes the
this.
menu.
I did sort of lie. If somebody came to me and said, "We are the owners of the Biltmore estate in Asheville, and we are considering putting it on the market for $3.8 billion, and we're looking for somebody to represent us, but we'll only consider an open listing."
Oh, should
I'd be
I?
like,
That's fine.
I'd be like,
Cardi B, Alter Ego Unite.
I'm be honest with you. I would have one response to that on a $3 billion listing. I'd be like Stevie Wonder, baby. I'm signed, sealed, delivered. I'm yours. You can have that open listing. I mean, because the truth is, if it's big enough listing, would you do it as an open listing just on the hope you could get a piece of this thing? Right?
Heck yes.
But
I'll take that chance.
But it would have to be a really, really outside the box sort of situation. Now, because here's the thing. Let's say our listing agent, Sarah, who works for Keller Williams Realty here, she's taking this open listing. She only has how many opportunities to get paid in this thing?
One.
One.
Out of thousands.
The only one. The only way she can get paid is if she and her office find who?
Buyer.
The buyer.
Find the buyer. What if some other office finds the buyer and Sarah has that open listing?
No.
Nope.
Hey, she doesn't get paid, correct?
Nope.
What if the seller shows up and says to Sarah, hey, you can come get your sign because we found the buyer ourselves? Sarah does not get what?
Hey.
She doesn't get paid. Does everybody see that in an open listing?
Yes.
Well, we could upgrade it. We could do an exclusive agency listing. In an exclusive agency listing, we've gotten a lot better. We still get Sarah paid if her office produces the buyer. So if she holds an open house and she finds the buyer, get her paid. Now, what do we upgraded her to? If she can get some other office to bring her a what?
Buyer.
A buyer. So can she essentially subcontract the work out at this point in time?
Yes.
Right? If she can get another office, and listen, the seller doesn't have anything to do with how much she has to pay that other office. Is that pretty much her choice as the listing office, how much of that compensation she wants to pay to other offices to bring a buyer to her?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so she can get another office to help her by bringing a buyer. She's still going to get paid. Her office is still going to get paid because she now has an exclusive agency listing. Everybody good with that?
Mm-hmm.
But even with the exclusive agency, there's still this situation where Sarah's going to be crying at the end of the day if the seller does what?
Produces their own buyer.
If the seller finds their own buyer, if their mama buys it or their cousin or somebody from the office buys it, then Sarah does not get paid. Sarah's office does not get paid. What's the gold standard when it comes to listing agreements, folks, from the firm's perspective?
Right to sell.
Exclusive right to sell.
Oh.
Right to sell. Because in the exclusive right to sell listing,
You get paid.
Sarah gets paid under all circumstances. No matter who finds the buyer, we're going to pay Sarah's office for finding that buyer. If Sarah's office finds the buyer, is her office going to get paid?
Yes.
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 If some other office on the other side of town finds the buyer, is Sarah's office going to get paid?
Yes. Yes.
If the seller themselves says, I sold it to my mama, is Sarah's office going to get paid?
Yes.
Yes. What kind of listing agreements are y'all going to try to have when you get out in the real world?
Exclusive right to sell.
Right to sell.
Exclusive right to sell. Exclusive right to sell. It is by far the most commonly used one out in the wild, so to speak. By far. It really is not even close. Now, there are some less common ones that are very much discouraged by the real estate commission. These less common listing agreements really don't happen much in North Carolina, but they do show up on the national section of the test because they're more common in some other places. The first one is called a net listing. A net listing is a really, in my opinion, weird type of listing where the seller doesn't limit our compensation. They limit their own money. If a seller gives us a net listing for $250,000, they're saying we don't care how much you sell this property for as long as we net how much money? $250,000. So if you sell it for $250,000, how much of a commission are you going to get to keep? If you have a $250,000 net listing, you sell it for $250,000, how much do you make?
150.
Zero. If you have a $250,000 net listing and you sell it for $250,000, how much do you make?
Zero.
Zero.
Nah.
If you have a $250,000 net listing and you sell it for $275,000, how much do you make? 25 grand. But if you have a $250,000 listing and you find a buyer willing to pay $400,000, you're going to make $150,000 in commission.
Right.
Do you all see why the real estate commission might discourage such a thing?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, this is a little bit beyond the pale as far as the North Carolina Real Estate Commission is concerned. The other thing that the Real Estate Commission really frowns upon in North Carolina, I'm not going to say they're illegal, but I'm just going to say they invite a lot of scrutiny, is something called a limited service agreement. Some companies have business models where they say, you know, you don't need a real estate broker for everything. Maybe you need us for helping you market the property, but you can handle your own negotiations. It is theoretically possible for us to negotiate to only do bits and pieces of the transaction.
Mm-hmm.
But the real estate commission is very reluctant to say that's a good idea because there are certain parts of our job which are non-negotiable. Like, for example, disclosing material facts. Even if you have a limited services listing, don't you still have the obligation to go and inspect the property and look for the material facts and then disclose those material facts?
Yes.
Yes.
So the real estate commission is very sort of reluctant. They would prefer that we do full service listings rather than limited services listings. And then, of course, there's the situation where you're not signing a listing agreement at all. You're just getting a compensation agreement from a seller. When do you think you would just be negotiating with a seller for your compensation, but you would be saying to the seller, I don't represent you. You're agreeing to pay me, and that's all. That's my only relationship to you.
For sale by owner.
When you represent the buyer and you're bringing your buyer client to a for sale by owner, might you try to negotiate your compensation when you bring that FSBO, your buyer client?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's not a listing agreement because you're not actually representing the seller. If you already had the buyer client with a buyer agency agreement, and then you come up and you sign a listing agreement with the seller, are they a FSBO anymore, or now you in dual agency?
Dual.
You'd be in dual agency, right? Think about that. If you already have a buyer agency agreement, haven't you been hired by the buyer?
Yes.
Now you come to the seller and you say, my buyer client's interested in your property. You put a listing agreement in front of the seller. If they sign that, they've what?
Hired you.
They've hired you. Now you've been hired by both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. What kind of agency is that? Dual agency. That's not what you meant to do. You didn't mean to represent the seller. You just meant to get paid by the seller. Can we get paid by people we don't represent in this business?
Absolutely.
Sure we can. I can say to the seller, I've got a buyer client. They're interested in your property. I'll bring them over here if you're willing to pay me a 3% commission. There's nothing wrong with having that negotiation. Now, the truth of the matter is I'm probably going to bring my buyer over there whether the seller agrees to pay me or not. Because who's probably still going to want to see the property even if the seller doesn't agree to pay me?
The buyer.
My client, the buyer. Right? But the seller doesn't know that. And am I obligated to explain to them that they don't have to pay me to bring that buyer over there, that I'm probably going to bring the buyer over there anyway? Am I obligated to explain that to that seller?
No, you're not.
No, they're not my what?
Client.
They're not my client. See, some of you have got this devious look in your eyes, and you're like, I like the way it's worked. It's devious. I'm sorry, it just is. We have a very clear differentiation of people, folks. If you're my client, I'm going to explain everything to you and make sure you understand and protect you. If you're my customer, you and of course you wrote in on. Sorry. Yeah, you ain't my job. And you have to learn to think of it that way. That's the way agency works. That's the way agency works, and it's really super important. So this is a good example of a question that you could expect to see on a test that relates to these different types of listing agreements. This is a really good example of what you could expect to see. It says Matt is a salesperson, which is very similar to our provisional broker in North Carolina, but just so you get familiar with the terminology. It says Matt is a salesperson who works for Terra Nova Properties and has taken a listing from Mr. Sampson, who's selling 6789 Elm Street. Well, if he's taken a listing, folks, that means we've signed a listing agreement. That means we now have a client. Who is our client?
Mr.
Sampson.
It would be Mr. Sampson, the seller. Does everybody recognize that?
Yes.
Okay. Listing agreement equals being hired by the seller. Okay. So now, we have now taken on the seller as a client. It says the listing agreement specifies that the 5% listing commission will be earned when Terra Nova Properties produces a ready, willing, and able buyer with a list price of $385,000. 2 weeks into the listing agreement, Matt brings a cash offer of $390,000 to Mr. Sampson. Which of the following statements is true? 1. Mr. Sampson is required to accept offers that are full price or better. What do you think? Keep it or boot it? Boot it. That's not possible. We cannot require Mr. Sampson. Oops, sorry. We cannot require Mr. Sampson to accept that offer. Does everybody agree with that statement?
Yes.
Okay. 2, Mr. Sampson owes the listing commission only if he accepts this offer. Keep it or boot it?
Boot it.
Boot it, because we have done the job. Does that make sense for everybody? We have produced what he said he wanted. Get rid of that. 3, Mr. Sampson is free to decline the offer, but must pay the commission in full to Terra Nova Properties. Keep it or boot it?
Keep it.
Keep it. Now, I heard somebody say correct. That scares me because that you're abandoning the most trusted test-taking topic in the class. Don't look for the right answer. Look for the ones that are wrong and do what with them? Eliminate them.
Eliminate
So when
them.
you come across one that you think is right, don't say it's the right answer. Challenge yourself to say, keep it. And what I'm trying to do is see if I can eliminate all 3 of the other ones. If I can eliminate all 3 of the other ones, do I have to think any more about this one being the right answer?
No.
No.
Oh. So I'm going to look at the last one. Terra Nova Properties has a net listing. Well, does anything about that sound like a net listing? And matter of fact, it's pretty clearly not a net listing because it says we're charging them what? 5%. So keep it or boot it?
Boot that one.
Boot it. Do we need to read 3 again, or is that the answer?
That's the answer.
The answer. Don't agonize over it. Don't think about it. That's the answer because we've eliminated the 3 other possibilities. Everybody all right with that statement?
Yes.
Okay. So look at this one. It says Kim is the broker in charge of Lake Gaston Limited Properties. Okay, Kim is the broker in charge of Lake Gaston Limited Properties and takes a new listing agreement with seller Susan, agreeing to compensate Lake Gaston Limited with 6% of the sales price of Susan's home. Lake Gaston Limited will have earned their commission under any and all circumstances, resulting in a ready, willing, and able buyer, except if Susan generates the buyer herself. This is an example of, let's look for things to eliminate. 1, is this an example of an exclusive right to sell listing?
No.
What word tells me this is not an exclusive right to sell?
Except.
Because exclusive right to sell has no what?
Exceptions.
Exceptions. Buyer gets found, you pay us. Get rid of it. Boot it. Everybody good with that?
Yes.
Get rid of it. Number 2, exclusive agency. Keep it or boot it?
Keep it.
Keep it.
Keep it. That looks like it could be an exclusive agency listing to me. You see how much less stress it is than committing to that being right just by saying it's possible, right?
Yes.
It's possible.
Yes.
It's so much less stress because when you commit to saying one's right, you sit there and you're like, you're not making a commitment. You're just going, I don't hate it, so I'm going to keep it around. I'm going to get rid of the ones I hate. I don't hate this one, so we're just going to keep it for a little bit. Look at 3. Does this sound like an open listing?
Absolutely not.
No, it doesn't sound like an open listing because it says Lake Gaston will have earned their commission under any and all circumstances except if Susan generates the buyer herself. That sounds way too detailed to be an open listing to me, doesn't it, y'all?
Yes.
So I'm going to boot that one out of here. And it doesn't sound to me like a limited services listing because it doesn't talk about what services are being limited. Does everybody agree with that?
Yes.
What am I going to do with that one?
Toss it.
Get rid of it. Again, if we've gotten rid of 3 of them, do we even need to think in? Do we need to invest any more bandwidth in this question?
Nope.
No.
It's number 2. Folks, as Seth put in the chat, this is such an underutilized test-taking strategy.
Trust me, I would have avoided doing this in my class. Please try it.
It
at
helps.
least once.
It helps so much.
Yes.
It helps so much. Very good. Very good. Now, let's talk about buyer agency as we kind of wind down for the day. Let's talk about buyer agency a little bit. Buyer agency works pretty much the same as listing agreements, except with buyer agency, the job is not to find a buyer. Hopefully that goes without saying. Buyers don't need you to find buyers. They are the buyer. Here I am. I don't need to pay you to find me. What do buyers pay us to find for them?
Property seller.
Any seller, any property?
No.
The one they want.
Okay, anyone they want?
They're looking
Property.
for.
And they close on it.
Oh, they actually got to buy the thing, don't they? Think about it, folks. Think about it. If they were paying us just for finding them the perfect property, as soon as they made a full price offer, we'd be like, oh, you owe us a commission. How many buyers would have had to pay like 20 commissions over the last couple of years when they didn't get all those houses that they offered on?
Girl, I wish.
Right? So buyer's agency is very different. What is necessary to say you are owed a buyer's agent commission? You got to do what?
Close.
You got to close. You got to close. You cannot claim ready, willing, and able for buyer agency agreements. You have to close. So right there, that tells you a big advantage to being a listing agent over a buyer's agent, does it not?
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely it does. You're not owed anything on a buyer agency agreement unless you actually get to closing. Now, the other thing we have to talk about with buyer agency that's different than listing agreements. Remember, we cannot offer any services at all to a seller until they have put their listing agreement in writing.
Right.
But with buyers, we can have what kind of an agreement for a limited period of time?
Oral.
We can have an oral agreement for a limited period of time with that buyer. But we know that we have to put it in writing at some point. When would that be?
Before
For the
offer.
offer.
Before an offer can be presented for that buyer. So at some point, we're probably going to have to put this buyer agency into writing. We can do it earlier than an offer, but we must do it at least by the time of offer. Now, it's going to work very largely the same as a listing agreement, except the ready, willing, and able goes away. Here's the other thing I want you to add into your notes right here. Not property specific. A listing agreement is property specific. They're hiring us to find a buyer for that what?
That property.
That property.
That one property. Folks, if that one property burns down, what do you think happens to a listing agreement on that property?
It's over.
It goes away. We can't find a buyer for something that doesn't exist anymore. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
But buyer agency agreements are not property specific. If somebody hires us to find a perfect house for them and it burns down, we still have a buyer agency agreement. We just got to find what?
Another
Come on.
property.
This is a test question.
It is a test question because they want you to recognize that buyer agency is different than seller agency. Buyer's agents just move on to the next property because their agreement is not specific to that one property. Now, we need to talk about this compensation here for just a second. We need to talk about this compensation. When we look at compensation for buyer agents, most buyers don't want to pay their own agent. Most buyers do not want to pull out a checkbook and write a check to pay their own agent. How many of you all think that's probably a pretty fair statement?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to.
Because most buyers are like, I'm already paying $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 for the property. I really got to pay you too? How many of
you won't?
How many of you think buyer agency would be much less common if we had to get compensation from the buyer? Lots.
I think it would, yeah.
Where do you think is actually most common for the compensation to come from? Now, the buyer's got to agree to the compensation because they're the one signing the agreement here. So let's say the buyer agrees that the compensation is going to be 3% of the sales price. Look here where it says we're going to try to get it first. Where are we going to go first to try to get that? We're going to try to get it from the seller or the agent representing the seller. How many of you think we're right back to the MLS again?
Yes.
Right? Yeah. We're going to go out there. And by the way, what do we call those transactions? Where we work together with another firm and we all...
Brokerage.
We call that a cooperative transaction or a co-brokerage transaction, right? So So if the buyers agree we're going to get paid 3%, we're going to first try to get that from who?
The seller.
The seller or the
Seller or their what?
Agent.
Or their agent. Everybody good with that?
Yes.
But is that always going to happen? I would say that's probably going to be 90% of the time. But is that always going to cover us? Is every property going to be listed by a listing firm?
No.
No. And even if it is listed by a listing firm, could the listing firm be offering $1 as compensation?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Alexia, you all right over there? Somebody scared you? She literally just jumped through that wall behind her. So, so the listing firm could be offering $1 in compensation. Well, that would suck, wouldn't it?
It would.
The listing agent could be offering 0 in compensation. Remember, they don't have to offer anything. Everybody with me on that thought process, right? So in the event that the listing firm's not offering enough, or there is no listing firm, guess who we're going to put on the hook for paying us?
the
The
buyer.
buyer themselves. And that's what the green box says. It says if the buyer purchases property where the compensation is less than the fee or where no compensation is offered, the buyer will pay the difference. So the buyer would pay us in that event, and we would have that conversation with them before we even showed them the property. How many of you think we better have that conversation with the buyer, right? And say, this property you want to look at is not offering any compensation. You need to understand that before we go in there, if you bought this one, you would have to pay my commission. What do you think a lot of buyers are going to say when you have that conversation?
I want to be like, no thanks.
I don't need to see that one. Move it along.
Right.
Go on. But it's their choice.
Myra asks, is this something rare where they're not going to pay commission the seller?
It's becoming more common. I mean, this
Which I think is a good thing.
This changes. I mean, think about the last couple years. Did listing firms really have to offer money to get buyers attracted, to get agents to bring buyers to their properties over the last couple years?
No.
No. You could find buyers a dime a dozen. So it became very common over the last couple of years for listing firms not to offer any compensation.
Some buyers were willing to pay their agent's commission as well as the seller's agent the commission. Like
market changes. Shanard, do you have a question?
I have an example, and I just want to clarify. So we have a big development here where I live in our town, and that's listed by a builder. They have their own agency. So they invited my husband for the presentation, and they said if the agents from outside bring the buyer, they only get $2,000. So technically, the buyer can use that as compensation on the contract, whatever that is not, meet the 3% of the.
The buyer would pay their agent the difference between whatever they had promised and whatever was being offered. So if 3%, let's say that they had agreed to 3% and 3% was going to be $15,000 and the builder's only offering 2, the buyer would owe the other 13.
Ah, good. Thank you.
That's the reason we have buyer agency agreements. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes.
Right? Okay. Now, here's the other beauty of buyer agency. Every once in a while, and it doesn't happen very often, this is super rare. Are there going to be times where the seller or the listing firm needs to really unload one, like a builder, and the house has been sitting around for a long time, and they stick a big old bonus on there? If you sell it this weekend, we'll pay you a $20,000 bonus. Y'all think that ever happens in our business?
Yes.
Yes. Well, guess what the buyer agency agreement says?
That can be allowed.
We can keep it. We can keep it. It says if any additional compensation is offered, then we're going to disclose it to you. We're going to tell you about it, but you're going to let us what?
Keep it.
You're going to let us keep it. You're going to let us keep it. So what the buyer agency agreement really sets up is 3 paths to compensation. The most common, of course, is that co-brokered transaction, which I'm going to mention in just a second, and we are winding this down. We talk about creating these agency relationships by signing them. But terminating them is equally important. What's the best way to terminate an agency relationship? To end it.
Fulfill it.
Fulfill it. Do the job, get paid, and everybody moves on with their life happy. That's by far, we call that full performance, right? Full performance. How about if the client dies? What do you think happens with an agency agreement if the client dies?
It terminates or it's done.
It goes away. Because the person who hired you, the person who agreed to compensate you is what?
Person that died.
You're not
Is
even
dead. Is dead. If they're a buyer, they're no longer a buyer because they're dead. If they're a seller, they're no longer the seller because they don't own the property anymore. Somebody else now owns the property because they're dead. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, be careful. That does not apply to the individual broker who was handling that transaction. Let's be honest. If you hire Travis to list your property for sale and Travis has a massive heart attack and dies, even if he owns the company, that agreement's not going anywhere because you didn't hire Travis. You hired who? You hired who or what? You hired the whole office. Somebody else from that company, folks, somebody else from that office is going to step up and take over that transaction.
Yeah, of course.
Okay? And then what did we say was the last way that we could terminate these agreements?
Mutual agreement of the property.
A mutual agreement. A mutual agreement. Both parties want it to go away. Here's the last thing I need to mention today before we turn you loose for the day, and I know it's a couple minutes past 3. Now, hopefully, you start to understand the importance of the co-brokered transaction. Are listing firms obligated to share their commission in any way?
No.
No. Then why do so many of them do it? Why do so many of them say, we will share, we'll give you some of our money. We might give you half of it, or we'll give you $1,000, or we'll give you 3% or 2%, or we'll give you something. Why, if listing firms are not obligated to do this, why do they do it? Why do they offer this?
To get a deal
bring in the
done.
buyer.
Buyer.
It's their job.
It helps them get the deal done. Remember, what has the listing firm been hired to do? To produce what?
A buyer.
Buyer.
A buyer. Who has all the buyers, folks?
Buyer agent.
Buyer agents do. What's the best way? If you want to find buyers, what's the best way to find buyers? Go talk to who?
Agent.
Their agents. And here's the thing. If you go talk to their agent and say, won't you come show my listing? Let's be real here. What's the first question most buyer agents are going to say to a listing agent when the listing agent says, won't you come show my listing? Is it going to be, oh, what's it look like? Is it nice for my client? Is it perfect? What's the first conversation going to be?
My compensation.
Show me how much you're going to pay my ass to come over there and sell your property for you. If you want me to drag my client over there to look at your property, you better be talking about some money. How many of you think that's just the brass tacks of our business right there? Right?
Yep.
Yes.
Now, here's the thing. Some listing firms don't offer compensation, and that's fine. They're still going to get paid if and when they find a buyer, but that make it harder for them to find a buyer in some ways.
Yes.
Absolutely. And so listing firms will generally make a decision about, are we going to offer some of this compensation to help get the deal done? Because if we could find a buyer in 2 or 3 days versus 2 or 3 months by offering this compensation, that's probably a good idea for us. Even if we do have to share the money. Do you understand now why a lot of buyers have this perception that they don't have to pay commissions?
Yes.
Because most of the time, where's that buyer's agent getting the compensation from?
Seller.
Not really from the seller, from who?
Listing agent.
Listing agent, the listing firm. The listing firm has already negotiated with the seller to charge 5%, 6%, 7%. And then they've decided, okay, we're going to share 3% of that. Is that 3% in addition to the 6% that they've agreed to? Or is that part of the 6% they've agreed to?
Part of.
It's part of. And so what they're saying to all those buyer's agents out there is, if you bring us a buyer that eventually purchases our property, we will give you, not the seller, not our client, will give you 3% of the sales price. Well, the reason they can do that is because they're getting 6% of the sales price from the seller. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Now, how about, though, if I'm going to change something on this screen. Let's say that buyer agency agreement does say 3% between the buyer and the buyer's agent. What if this listing firm was on, because I just want to make sure you understand this. What if this listing firm was only offering 1%? And the buyer agency agreement was for 3% right here.
The buyer.
They owe the difference.
The buyer paid the 2%.
The buyer would have to pay the 2% difference. Does everybody see that?
Yes.
The buyer would have, and when do you think we should disclose that to the buyer? That if you buy this property, you not only are you going to be paying the seller for the property, but you got to pay us 2% of the sales price to make up the difference
Before they make an offer.
before they make an offer. And disclosures are always made in what format in our business?
Writing.
Writing before they make an offer. Absolutely, folks. That's how compensation largely works in our business. So these co-brokered transactions are really just a way of splitting up commissions. And that brings us to our stopping point for today. And that pretty much takes care of unit 3.5. Now, you're going to have some bit of 3.5 left. I'm going to try to separate this out into a separate video. What I like to do with the math, because that's what's coming up next here in 3.5, is math, calculating commissions. I've learned over the years that teaching math in actual class time is not a really good use of our time. And here's why. Everybody's on a different pace when it comes to math, right? Everybody's on a different pace. Some people get math instantly as soon as I put it in front of them. Some people, it takes a little while. Some people, we have to go through it 15 times. It doesn't really matter what pace I choose. It's going to be a bad pace for a bunch of you. You know, for some of you, no matter what pace I choose, I'm going too slow. For some of you, no matter what pace I choose, I'm going too fast. Here's what I've found about math in this class. It's better off to do it self-paced. That doesn't mean you're left by yourself. You've already seen what I do in a math video. How many of you felt like you were working by yourself when you watched the math video, or you felt like I was working through it with you, right?
Yes.
So videos work when it comes to the math. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate out just the math into a separate video and send you a link to it so that you can, on your own time and at your own pace, watch the math portion of this unit and work through it. The good news is, if you didn't understand that example, can you stop right there, rewind, and go back and watch that same example again?
Yes.
Yes. And so there is a math worksheet for unit 3.5, and you will need to watch the end of the 3.5 video for the math, and then the math worksheet. The math worksheet also has an accompanying video where I'm doing the entirety of the math worksheet. All right?